where more than half the world's population lives. Heat waves amplify urban heat islands and air pollution to affect people's health. Critical infrastructure such as transport, water sanitation, and energy system have been compromised by extreme events. When multiple extreme events happen at the same time, they compound the overall risk and are more difficult to manage. What you see here is an example of how heat and drought combine to cause reductions in crop yields, made worse by reduced productivity because of heat stress among farm workers. Reduced yield lead to reduction in household incomes, increased food prices locally and potentially globally. Climate risks do not respect national boundaries, and weather-related extremes are creating shocks to global trade. In the previous slide, we illustrated the powerful impacts of climate change on nature and on people's lives. This assessment is based on new understanding of these interconnections. We can no longer think in silos, but have to look across climate, biodiversity, and human society and well-being if we want to tackle the many global challenges we face today. And talking of other challenges, climate change combines with unsustainable use of nature resources, habitat destruction and deforestation, and growing urbanization, as well as inequality and marginalization. These trends not only present threat to ecosystems and the people who rely on them, but also the capacities of nature, communities, and individuals to adapt to the climate change. $3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in global hotspots of high vulnerability to climate changes. These are across a large part of Africa, as well as South Asia, Central and South America, small islands, and the Arctic. In these global hotspots, overlapping challenges include limited access to water, sanitation, and health services. High levels of climate-sensitive livelihoods, such as smallholder farmers and fishing communities all encourage vulnerability. High levels of poverty, weak leadership, lack of funding, lack of accountability, and trust in government also play a part. Looking to the future, every small increase warming will reduce, I'm sorry, for presentation. Excuse me. The presentation is slowly down, so I'm sorry, yeah. Looking to the future, every small increase in warming will result in increased risks to nature and to people in every region of the world. Here we see a bleached coral colony on a dying reef of Okinawa, Japan. Let's consider some of these projected impacts on nature. This map gives an overview of diversity loss at different warming levels. We would see species extinctions and losses of entire ecosystems, such as mountain tops, subtropical and coastal wetlands. Even if we temporarily exceed 1.5 Celsius degree warming for several decades. The risk of extinction in biodiversity hotspots increases by about tenfold as warming rise from 1.5 to 3.0 Celsius degrees. Nature services support all aspects of our lives, from pollination of tourism to health and climate regulation. Loss of ecosystems and their services has cascading and long-term impacts on possible of people globally, especially for indigenous people and the local communities who directly depend on them. Globally, population exposure due to heat waves will continue. Approximately 2.0 Celsius degree regions that are highly dependent on snow melt could experience a 20% decline in water activities for agriculture beyond 2050. And we know that climate change will undermine food security. At 2.0 Celsius warming by 2050, people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Central and South America, and on small islands are likely to experience food shortage, leading to malnutrition. About 1 billion people living in low-lying cities and other settlements on the coast are projected to be at risk from sea level rise and other climate hazards by mid-century. We provide a global perspective here, but this report has an extensive regional purpose. We have outlined the challenges we face and how they will increase at higher warming levels. The key question now is how we are adapting to changing climate change. What it shows is that action has increased, but progress is uneven and we are not adapting fast enough. Growing public and political awareness of climate impacts and risks has resulted in at least 170 countries and many cities, including adaptation in their climate policies and planning. However, there are increasing gaps between adaptation action taken and what's needed. These gaps are largest among low-income populations. At the current rate of planning and implementation, these adaptation gaps will continue to grow. Let's now turn our attention to how we adapt. And this report shows that there are feasible, effective options we can take to reduce the risks to people and nature, but their effectiveness decreases with increasing warming. When we think of adaptation, our first thoughts might be around reducing flood risk or preventing water shortages. But what it shows is that strengthening health system can reduce the impact of infectious disease, heat stress, and other climate-related risks, as well as the trauma associated with the extreme events. This is particularly effective if it is combined with other measures, such as disease surveillance, early warning systems, and improving access to potable water. Nature offers significant untapped potential, not only to reduce climate risks and deal with the causes of climate changes, but also to improve people's lives and livelihoods. Agroforestry is a climate resilient way of growing food and creating wildlife habitat. Here we see a Nigerian rubber farmer diversifying his business with food crops, fruit trees, and bees. Conservation, protection, and restoration can help natural forests to adapt. Planting a range of tree species, managing pests and disease, and reducing wildfire risk can build climate resilience in managed forest. In agriculture, irrigation can be effective, but it can result in adverse outcomes such as accelerated depletion of groundwater. This and other provide the economic and ecological benefits as well as reducing vulnerability. In urban areas and elsewhere, effective water management can secure drinking water. Most action to date has occurred around water-related hazards, such as reducing risk from flood and droughts, letting nature take its course, such as restoring wetlands and rivers, and creating no-build zone can reduce flood risk. The effectiveness of most water-related adaptation declines with increasing warming. Food security can be enhanced by making the food system more resilient. For example, through adapting stress-tolerant crops and livestock, agroforestry, and diversification on farms. Community-based adaptation that is locally driven, that respects local and indigenous knowledge systems, and is adequately resourced can also be effective. Strengthening biodiversity can improve pest control, pollution, pollination, carbon storage, and it can provide shade for temperature-sensitive crops such as coffee and cacao. This all brings a range of other benefits for nutrition, health, and well-being and livelihoods. By 2050, urban areas could be home to 2/3 of the world's population. Cities also offer opportunities to transform. Using nature and engineering approaches together is important. To manage flood risk, for example, it might be appropriate to install flood proofing on buildings, improve drainage along roads, and create space for water within the city at the same time as constructing flood defenses. Establishing or restoring green and blue space, park green corridors, pond, and wetland, as well as urban agriculture can also be woven into the built environment. Social safety nets for disaster management can help people overcome the impact of climate change and can provide financial security. Additional benefits include public health improvements, especially from reducing heat stress and ecosystem conservations. In informal settlements, we show how local knowledge, adequate funding, skill and tools, as well as policymakers, residents working together can deliver adaptation at city scale. Accountability, transparency, and commitment from government is also important. Here we see community sanitation facilities being built and water tanks being installed in formal settlements in India. We have evidence of maladaptation. Adaptation that results in unintended consequences. For example, increased climate-related risks or increased greenhouse gas emissions. In this photograph, on the left are sea defenses that may not be strong enough to protect the people living behind them. People can be lured into the false sense of security. Compare this to example from Delaware, USA, of how it is possible to use nature to provide flood protection. Indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, and disadvantaged groups. For example, low-income households and those living in informal settlements are some of the most affected by maladaptations. This imposes and entrenches existing inequalities. We know that there are adaptation limits. Adaptation cannot prevent all losses and damages. And even with effective adaptation limits will be reached with a higher level of warming. Some natural solutions will no longer work above 1.5 Celsius degree warming. Above 1.5 Celsius degree, a lack of fresh water could mean that people living on small islands and those dependent on glaciers and snow melt can no longer adapt. And by 2.0 Celsius degree, it may be especially challenging to farm multiple staple crops in many current growing areas, particularly in tropical regions. If we focus on financial constraints, we see that current global financial flows are insufficient, especially in developing countries. The overwhelming majority of global tracked climate finance was targeted at emissions reduction, while a small population went on adaptation. Climate impacts that result in higher levels of losses and damages also slow down economic growth and thus reduce the availability of financial resources. To avoid mounting losses, urgent action is required to adapt to climate change, but that's not enough. At the same time, it is essential to make a rapid, deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions to keep the maximum number of adaptation options open. So, how do we accelerate and sustainable adaptation? Political commitments and follow through across all levels of government is key. Great adaptation is presents where national climate laws and policies require adaptation action from low-level government and include guidelines on how to do this. Another area was focusing on is in institutional frameworks with clear goals and priorities that define responsibilities. These frameworks can impose duties upon governments to implement adaptation actions. For example, around the conservation, sustainable use of beaches, urban development, and targeting diseases exacerbated by climate changes. Enhancing knowledge of impact, risk, and available adaptation options encourages actions from society and policymakers. Educational and information programs and the arts can play the part. Monitoring and evaluation is important to track progress because in a warming world, measures that are effective now might not work in 2 years. Adaptation strategies might have to be revised consistently. Revision should not fade and data-driven. And finally, inclusive governments that prioritize equality and justice is also important. Citizens, civil society organizations should participate directly in planning and decision making. It is important to highlight that adaptation measures offer wider benefits. If we consider the 3.5 billion people living in rural areas, many of whom are highly vulnerable to climate changes, resilience can be improved by providing social safety net, improved roads, reliable energy, clean water, and improved food security. These measures not only build climate resilience, but they also go hand in hand with helping to lift people out of poverty and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal #1. These are the simple examples to demonstrate how different goals may be achieved in a variety of circumstances. In this report, we have looked at these synergies in the same depths. And this is how we illustrate the multiple benefits of adaptation options. If we look at this figure, you see forest-based adaptation. It shows that it is a feasible adaptation option that will also help absorb and store carbon. And it is mitigate potentials. And it helps achieve multiple sustainable development goals marked here with a plus. Likewise, if we look at options, in our cities, we see that green infrastructures, green roofs, park, and street trees play a part in helping us adapt. By providing shade and water management, they also absorb and store carbon. Again, they help with the multiple UN goals. What you see here is Foundation for Solutions framework. That is an important new concept in the report. Let's explore this now. If we look at this figure, we see a spectrum of features from world with low resilience and high risk to one with high resilience and low risks. This high resilience, low risk world has reduced the climate risk through adaptation, reduced the greenhouse gas emissions through mitigation, and enhanced the biodiversity. These measures together support sustainable development. For example, no poverty, zero hunger, good health, and well-being, and this access to clean water and sanitation. This concept is climate resilient development. Climate resilient development has to be considered across government and all of civil society. It should involve everyone around the table: government, citizens, communities, educational institutions, the media, investors, and business forming partnerships. Scientific, indigenous, and local knowledge and practical know-how come together to provide more relevant, effective actions. Ecosystem stewardship is key. A healthy planet is fundamental to climate resilient development. Effective of equitable conservation of approximately 30 to 50% of land, freshwater systems, and oceans can help ensure a healthy planet. involving traditionally marginalization groups, including women, young people, indigenous peoples, local communities, and ethnic minorities, improves the prospects for effective action. It is critical to prioritize equity and justice in decision-making and investment. Different interests, values, and worldviews can be reconciled if everyone works together. Scaled up investments and international cooperation are also important. Starting today, every action, every choice, and every decision matters because each of them can take us away from or towards a climate resilient, sustainable world. Worldwide action to achieve climate resilient and sustainable development is more urgent than previously assessed. Climate resilient development is already challenges at current global warming levels. The prospects will be further limited if global warming exceeds 1.5 Celsius degree and may not be possible in some regions, including small island, deserts, mountain, and polar regions, if warming exceeds 2.0 Celsius degrees. The sense is clear. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure the livable futures. This report offers solution to the world. This presentation has given you a snapshot of a wide range of topics that are covered in depth in this report. It's over to you now. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, that very sobering summary of the report. I think it really highlights, well, brings into stark reality, what we need to consider and the importance of resilience in investors' work. And I'll get the team to put in the link to the previous AIGCC report on physical risk tools, the compendium of tools that we produced at the end of last year as a reminder. But really want to thank you today very much for that presentation. And we're going to open up to Q&A session now. So I see a couple of questions have come through in the chat, but just handing over to my colleague Anjali to take us through this Q&A. Thanks, Anjali.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Professor Cheong, for this presentation. I thought it was fantastic, and I think some of the questions that have already been raised in the chat would sort of take us back to some of the more insightful slides from this presentation. So I think Amar Gill has posed a question on adaptation versus mitigation. So I mean, I wonder if